What is up, creators? This is Tom. Welcome back to another video. So by the end of this video, I want you to be able to take better photos. One of these tips, and hopefully a lot more than just one of them, will help you to take better photographs. All of these tips are completely free, bar maybe like one, and you know what that means. It is time for another Budget Wednesday. Okay, this might be a little bit of a long list, but I'm going to power straight through. But first, a very quick intro. My name is Tom. I am a freelance photographer, videographer, and YouTuber. I make videos here on content creation, photography, and video. I'm also going to start trialing a Q&A section at the end of each video. So if you would like to ask a question and be featured in my next video, just drop one in the comment section down below and I might get to it. Okay, guys, going in strong, we are starting with just go and shoot. Now, this is basically the biggest tip that I can give you. You can watch videos like this one that I'm recording here time and time again, but the best way of getting better and becoming a better photographer is just to go out and do it. You can watch something like this, and then hopefully this might inspire you to go out after this video and go and shoot some photos. When in doubt, if you don't know what to do, just go and shoot. Okay, so camera gear is a contentious one. You know, I create videos all the time on camera gear. I'm definitely not one of these people that says gear does not matter. What I'm trying to sort of package here is that you don't obsess too much about your gear, especially when it comes to photo. In my opinion, video is a little bit more gear centric than photos. If your gear is good enough, stop worrying about the camera gear. You can create amazing images using just a smartphone now, but then obviously if you have access to something like, this is my EOS R, my Canon EOS R. This is a professional level mirrorless camera. This is what I use for all of my paid photography work. And this is an absolutely amazing camera. And you don't need to worry about your gear past this point, because pretty much you can just pick this up and start creating great photos with it. So I've just said, if your gear is good enough. How do you know whether your gear is good enough? And for me, a really decent benchmark is whether or not a camera shoots RAW. This is why you're a little bit restricted by phones nowadays, because these don't always shoot in RAW modes. A camera like my EOS R, you're able to edit the files and the photos dramatically in post to go from something which looks, quite dark and dingy with a real capture and really transform it into an amazing looking image. Like I said, if your camera can shoot RAW, in my opinion, you should always be shooting RAW, because it just gives you the best option, best flexibility, and best chance to create a great photo. Speaking of shooting RAW, if you've got a RAW photo, a fantastic tip is to profile correct your images in Lightroom. If you haven't got Adobe Lightroom, I would suggest maybe investing in it. It's not a very expensive tool. You can buy the photography package. I think it comes out to around $10 a month, or £10 a month here in the UK. And there's a little profile correction, and this will correct your lens and basically dramatically improve the RAW photo that you've taken in just one click. If you're not profile correcting your images, this is an immediate quick tip, which is going to dramatically improve your photos. Shoot in manual, or at least understand manual as a mode. The three basic camera settings, aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, being able to understand how these work together and shooting in a manual mode is a really good way to do that. You of course can play around with the other modes like shutter speed priority, aperture priority, and these might actually help you and sort of speed up your photography if you're out and about and just need something to work straight away. I would really suggest getting off auto as soon as you can after you buy a decent camera, because it will just give you a much firmer grasp of your camera. It's important to know your camera settings and know how the different settings are going to change your images. Okay, so this is sort of like a 2-in-1, and this is like, if you take landscapes, say you are a landscape photographer, I think you should go and take some portraits. And if you take portraits, if you are a portrait photographer, I think you should go and take some landscapes. Obviously, lots of us are photography generalists and sort of just do, lots of these different things. But on the whole, I would say it is a fantastic challenge, a really good use of time to maybe get a bit of experience shooting different styles of photography. You learn a totally different selection of skills when you're shooting portraits than you do from landscapes. Things like lighting and being able to craft light on somebody's face, maybe think about how, a subject is interacting with a background. Likewise, with landscapes, you'll really learn a different selection of skills, things like long exposures and bracketing. There's all these things that come into creating great images. Trying something new is a fantastic option. And that leads me on to my next point, that I think both of you, say you are a portrait photographer or a landscape photographer, I think you should go and start some street photography. Go and try and practice some street photography, because it's an amazing way to get better at your craft. Go out and shoot a whole bunch of photos and hopefully get some amazing street images. It's a fantastic way to practice when you're working with buildings. It's really fun to work out composition and hopefully, wait for people and subjects to move through your your image. It's just a really, really good choice, a really good fun photography exercise. Experiment with different lighting. I'm not necessarily talking about sort of buying studio lights that like I have set up here, but even when you're sort of working outside, maybe you want to try a portrait in the direct sun and see how that affects your images, or maybe you could hold a hand up and create a shadow on a face. There's lots of different ways of experimenting with light. And this is obviously a dramatically huge topic, but thinking about the light that's in your photos is a really good intentional step to creating better ones. And that leads us on to shooting at different times of the day if you are shooting outside. As the day goes on, light changes and the shapes that light is going to create, because the sun is this enormous source of light, like a bit like I have here, and throughout the day that is moving above us. So that creates a whole host of different images. If you're wanting an easy solution to this, as a rule, I would always suggest shooting at the start of the day or the end of the day. This is what we call golden hour. However, just before the sun has risen and just after the sun has risen, that's called blue hour. So you can really get some different images in that sort of period as well. There's a whole host of choices that you can make, and the way that different light will affect your photos will be quite dramatic. I definitely recommend going and taking some landscape photography in golden hour, and you might get something looking really, really beautiful. All right, so we're coming on to some camera setting stuff now. First of all is to change your shutter speed. Your shutter speed is an amazing tool to be able to dictate and change the style of your photos. From long exposure shots to uber fast sort of like sports capture shots, these looks are entirely different, and they're basically just changed with one setting. Decreasing your shutter speed is a really good way to let more light into the frame if you're in a low light situation. There's all of these ways where changing your shutter speed and getting creative with your shutter speed can really change and shift your photos. The next one would be changing your aperture or your depth of field. Again, this will affect the amount of light coming into the frame, but this will affect your sort of background blur on the whole. That's the sort of most simplistic way to look at aperture. You can create some fantastic images with some shallow depth of field, creating blur in the background, and changing your aperture on your camera is the easiest way to achieve this. However, you can also achieve this with lens compression. So if you're using a zoom lens, like this one I have here. So this is the Canon 70-200, and it's pretty much my favorite lens of all time. I absolutely love it. It's unbelievably versatile. The background will look quite different at 200mm than it will to 70mm. So being able to understand these different focal lengths, but you wouldn't want to shoot a landscape necessarily with this because it's not really wide enough to be able to take in the whole sort of depth of a scene. I would suggest a wide angle lens like I'm using here. By understanding your focal lengths and being able to choose the right focal length for the right photos, you're going to be able to produce better images. Now though, talking about focal length, that 70-200 is a zoom lens. Maybe you're new to photography, I would suggest actually buying a prime lens and trying a prime lens if you're used to zooms. What this will do is this will actually improve your composition skills, because you're able to sort of walk around and actually change the way a shot looks intentionally and by physically moving yourself instead of just, you know, winding a setting on your camera. Every photographer, in my opinion, should own a prime, and maybe just go out one day and shoot only exclusively with your prime lens. Learn decent photo composition and try different photo compositions. Photo composition is an absolutely massive topic, and we're not going to be able to touch dramatically on a video like this, but what I would suggest is just learning and playing around with your photo composition. Sometimes framing your subject like I'm sort of featured in this video right here, like in the center of your frame, is not always the most interesting way that a subject can be represented in a photo. Think about what you're taking a photo of and ask yourself, is there a more interesting way that I could frame this in the frame that might look more interesting? A fantastic way to do that, and this is also why I recommend the street photography route and practice, is symmetry. Now, buildings are a fantastic way to get symmetry in your images, and that is a really good route to be able to learn symmetry and understand symmetry in your images. Again, these are enormous topics. We're only going to briefly be able to touch on this, but you can just see the difference in these images that I'm showing you now. If these images weren't symmetrical, they wouldn't be nearly as impressive. So again, going back to that street photography tip, I think this is a really good way to practice getting some symmetry into your photos. Go out, shoot some street photos, shoot some buildings, and you will become a better photographer. So next day, I'm editing the video that I shot last night, and I actually realized that I entirely cut out number 17. So rather than skip it entirely, I thought I would film it now, and I want to talk about cropping. You can actually dramatically improve your composition just by simply cropping the photo. Let's take this photo here, one of my favorites that I took from the Peak District, when I visited last year. Taking this photo entirely wide, you can see that this is not like the best photo in the world. However, once we apply an edit and then crop in so I'm fully in the center of the frame, perfectly in center, the photo is a lot better. You can also get creative and crop it so I was on the left-hand side or the right-hand side in terms of the rule of thirds. Like, there's lots of different options you can do. Now I want you to actually think about the subject that you are taking a photo of. I think we get so caught up in actually taking the photo, filming it to put it on YouTube and TikTok and wherever we're doing that sometimes you just need to take a step back, frame a subject and take a photo. Think about what you're taking a photo. How can I make that subject better? If you're working with people, maybe you can help make your subject more at ease, maybe make them more relaxed, because that will lend itself to a better photo. Everything is not always in the actual camera settings and where you place the camera. Sometimes it's about what you're taking a photo of. Be intentional with your photography. All right, I just had to go hunting for this book because this next tip sort of follows on from the thing about talking about gear and why you shouldn't always be thinking about buying new gear. But one thing I would recommend is to buy books and read photography books, because they're a fantastic way to learn. So, you know, this is an example of a book. This is an example of a book. This is an example of a book that centers around landscape photography and creating great landscape photos. I'll link this down below in the description. Really cheap, but it is the only thing that will cost you money on this list. Buy some photography books and have a read. Finally, practice. Go out and practice. Just try and create photos. Take your camera out wherever you are. When you're going to the shop, maybe bring your camera and just practice. Like I say, watching videos like this are fantastic and can be really helpful, but the only way you're actually going to get better is if you take things like this and put them into practice. Okay guys, back at the edit computer, and I have a first question of the video that I'd like to share with you guys. So this was asked by Avocado Squad, and he's basically asked for some advice about growing creativity. And this is like super good question, really related to this video and what this video is about. You know, it's an enormous question. It's not something that I have an answer for, but I will tell you what works for me. And for me, it's actually to share my work online. Like, I'm not an innately creative person. I don't have these unbelievable ideas that sort of just spark and then I'd have to go and work on something. But putting myself on a deadline where I have to make YouTube videos, I have to upload Instagram content, that really helps with my creativity because it forces me into action, finding something to work on. I don't have an option. I have to find something to get inspired about and start creating. Hopefully that maybe helps. Maybe try starting like an Instagram page where you're sharing your work and maybe put yourself on a deadline that you want to create a photo every single 2 days. Maybe that might help you. That is my advice on growing creativity. There we go, guys. Those are the 21 tips. I really hope this video isn't like half an hour long, but I wanted to express all my thoughts and feelings about this topic. Maybe you have some suggestions for some photography tips for new photography starters. Drop them in the comment section. Let's create a dialogue down there. I hope you have enjoyed this video and I will catch you next time.